So the first effort for us now is to be able to talk about UNDP support to youth skills development for employment. We have identified about 45 minutes today for a chance to have a presentation, to talk a little bit with our colleagues from the country office in Albania about some of their experience in this area, and of course open the floor for a series of discussions. We're going to have the chat space open for persons to ask questions and to be able to engage. And I wanted to let all of you know that we've also linked up with UNDP's digital platform for online engagement, which is called SparkBlue. And it's a further opportunity for us to be able to engage and have a discussion on these reflection issues that's online. And we'll be presenting in the background chat some information on the connection to SparkBlue, which will be a continuing platform for us to be able to have such a dialogue. Without further ado, let me pass the floor to our director, Oscar Garcia, who will go ahead and make an introduction, followed by the author of our first work this year on our first reflection paper on youth, Xiaoling Zhang. Oscar, let me pass the floor to you to kick us off. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alan. Good day, colleagues. We are delighted to have you joining us for this webinar today. A very warm welcome to all of you. The gap between people living in rich and poor countries continues to widen, and many young people are particularly at risk of falling into poverty. 1 in 6 youth had to stop work since the onset of the pandemic. Many young workers are more likely to be employed in highly affected occupations such as support services and sales-related work, making them more vulnerable to the economic consequences of COVID-19. 42% of those who have continued to work have seen their incomes reduced. UNDP promotes youth focus and youth-led development and advances youth economic development. UNDP skills development for youth employment efforts range from strengthening what have been known as technical and vocational education and training systems, to building institutional capacity of public employment services to deliver skills development interventions. Here at the Independent Evaluation Office, the outbreak of COVID-19 has been an opportunity to help us rethink our role in organizational learning and in helping decision makers who address current challenges and support countries for the recovery. So the goal of reflections from evaluations is to harness existing evaluative evidence, looking backwards, the insight, and translate that data into meaningful insights, hopefully the lessons that we will be sharing with you, to eventually provide input for the foresight that decision makers can act upon. Through rapid evidence assessments, the information contained in UNDP's Evaluation Resource Center, as mentioned by Alan, that is the country level and thematic evaluations, as well as high quality decentralized project evaluations, we have put together lessons learned papers around UNDP signature solutions. Today, we will hear about the lessons we learned from analyzing UNDP support to youth skills development for employment based on past evaluations. We hope that you will find them useful, and the learning loop goes both ways. After this webinar, we hope you will continue to exchange with us on our new SparkBlue space, sharing your examples and thoughts on youth economic development. This will feed into a thematic evaluation that IEO is conducted on the topic, which will be brought to the attention of the UNDP Executive Board in 2022, next year. So with those brief remarks, I would like to again pass the floor to Xiaoling. She has been the lead author of this paper. Xiaoling, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Oscar. And hello, colleagues. Can you see the slides?
Yes, very well.
Great. Welcome, colleagues, and thank you for joining us in this conversation about youth skills development for employment. Indeed, youth unemployment is one of the most challenging issues our societies face today. From a skills development perspective, in recent COVID lockdown period, we have seen the closure of schools and training facilities worldwide, further hindering youth access to education and training. So the UN Youth 2030 strategy requests the development partners to improve skills development systems to ease school to work transition, as well as reduce the rate of youth who are not in employment, education, and training. UNDP's programming in this area range from designing and delivering capacity building activities targeting youth at the individual level to at organization level strengthening institutional capacities. And many times UNDP's skills development interventions form part of its broader employment and entrepreneurship programs. So in those cases, sometimes UNDP also support the government to enhancing the enabling environment by developing relevant policies or facilitate access to financing. A very quick word on the methodology. So this paper used a rapid evidence assessment of both independent country program evaluations that are conducted by the IEO, as well as decentralized project and outcome evaluations that are available on the ERC. So that is to say that this is not a research paper or an in-depth analysis of this thematic area, but the emphasis here is really to find those lessons that are relevant for UNDP programming and operations. Having said that, we identified 8 main lessons. Of course, each lesson would touch on multiple elements or spheres of the ecosystem of skills development. But for the sake of simplicity today, let us divide them into 2 groups. The first group mainly talks about the good practices to improve youth employability. That range from the different types of interventions that are needed to the additional barriers that are faced by disadvantaged youth groups, as well as engagement of employers to overcome the often faced mismatch between skills demand and skills supply. So if you're interested in these 3 lessons, please have a look at our paper for more details. The second group is about system strengthening that includes institutional capacity development and enhancing the enabling environment, as well as partnerships. So very shortly afterwards, the colleagues from Albania country office will share their experience in this regard. But for the next few minutes, let us have a closer look together at 3 of these lessons. The first one is about TVET, the technical and vocational education and training systems. So UNDP's interventions in this area range from helping the government to develop integrated TVET policies to help create an enabling environment for TVET enhancement, to delivering training of trainers to create a network of trainers to efficiently deliver and cascade skills trainings to youth. In countries such as Mali and Congo, training of trainer activities also benefited from collaboration with UN volunteers, as well as national volunteer mechanisms. In Bahrain and Azerbaijan, evaluation have found that UNDP can play a broker role for partnerships to introduce internationally recognized certification and accreditation to both TVET institutions as well as universities. This can help employers to better recognize the skills that the youth have. So besides those policy and technical support, UNDP also work on modernization of TVET facilities. That includes the upgrades of infrastructure and equipment. The evaluation in Tajikistan have found that this line of work have contributed to changing the generally low social image of TVET and improving its attractiveness to young students. The next lesson is about UNDP support to national and local government. Previous evaluation have found that UNDP's intervention in skills development, its scope and its scale are often very limited, especially when they are not embedded in a larger national strategy or program. So that was the case in Timor-Leste, where the KUNA project used a platform approach combining research to policy support to service delivery support, and by itself became a flagship activity. However, because of the lack of national funding commitment, it faced major challenges in scaling up. On a more positive note, evaluations have also seen some effective and productive programs where UNDP combined upstream and downstream support to help the government design and implement active labor market measures and policies, such as those programs in Albania, as well as in Sierra Leone. And in several countries, evaluations have found that UNDP has a comparative advantage in building capacity of regional and local level institutions, and thus increasing the access of youth to skills development activities and other support. In some countries, this line of work not only benefited from UNDP colleagues based in the country office, but also from the long-term support and close accompaniment of UNDP staff based in the field offices in those regions, sub-regions, and the local places. So the last lesson we are going to look at together is about entrepreneurship, which is not a silver bullet for youth unemployment. Evaluations have found that innovation can be an important lever for creation of economic opportunities for young people. In this regard, UNDP has been promoting an innovation incubation model by creating innovation and entrepreneurship hubs, labs, and service centers to deliver skills trainings to youth on innovation, technology, business management, leadership, advocacy, as well as any other skills that young entrepreneurs would require. And in some countries, such as Rwanda, activities targeting individual youth skills development are complemented by activities targeting youth cooperatives at a group level. However, youth, especially those coming from a disadvantaged background, needs time and experience to develop an entrepreneurial mindset and act accordingly. So this requires long-term support. Locally based institutions can serve as a one-stop shop to deliver a suite of support and activities in a more coherent and efficient manner. A commonly faced challenge for youth startup is the lack of sustainability and scale-up opportunities. So that is often related to the unsustainable access to financing, especially after the initial seed funding received from those entrepreneurship programs have ended. Youth normally have no or very little collateral, so it is very difficult for them to secure funding from commercial banks. UNDP's activities in this regard has been to try to bridge the distance between the financial institutions and the young entrepreneurs, and to promote the expansion of microfinancing programs to young entrepreneurs, such as microcredits programs. So let me stop here and invite the colleagues from Albania country office to share their experience. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your attention. Nuno and Ano, the floor is yours. I'll be helping you with the slides.
Thank you very much, Xiaoling. I hope everybody can hear me. Yes.
Very well.
I'll be extremely brief because the time is very limited. So I just want to thank you for the invitation to share with everyone seeing the work we've done on youth skills development for employment. My colleague Eno, to whom I will give the floor, has been running this program for a number of years, and he is the expert. So I would not pretend to speak on his behalf. So just to thank you for the invitation and pass it over to Eno. Eno, I believe you're there, right?
Yes, correct. I hope everyone can hear me. Yes, hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
we can
good.
hear you
Excellent.
well, Eno.
Excellent.
Please,
Yeah, thank you. So thank you very much for picking Albania as part of this webinar. And I think I have a pleasure to present what we've done, although I do have the impossible task to present a decade of work over like a few minutes. So I think we'll get the chance to go through some of the at least experiences and lessons that we have been facing. Just a couple of words basically about Albania, small country in Southeastern Europe, transition now, middle income, face a lot of challenges in terms of migration. large youth unemployment, large numbers of people in not employment and training, country en route to the European Union accession, with a lot of challenges in terms of systemic and approximation to the legislation and approaches in the European Union. We've been lucky to have enjoyed the partnership of a long-term support from Switzerland that have like a vested interest in supporting the vocational training in Albania, and not only, but to introduce and expand their sort of like approach in the VET. And also we've been also lucky enough to be able to generate continuous funding for applying piloting and prototyping and innovative approaches to youth employment and youth engagement. And I think this is where we come from in terms of the systemic approach. We did start about 10 years ago with a local level intervention that looked into like active labor market measures for targeted youth in certain areas of northern Albania, which are known to be poor. And then as years grew by, basically our also support moved to a systemic level, just because of the so there are so many engagements and so many support to youth employment in Albania, and I guess in the region as everywhere. It's always a nice topic and a nice thing to work about. However, being in a country where there's a lot of donor support and many international agencies have their own approaches, I think it became sort of like very imperative that these approaches be coordinated, synergized, and somehow put into a systemic context. That's why we moved from the local level interventions and piloting to a systemic sort of like level, which looks into the policies and institutional frameworks and capacities all along the UNDP's three-pronged capacity development approach. And I think we've been sort of like very successful in embedding our piloting schemes and approaches in the national policy context. We are our work in support of active labor market measures. Every year, actually, we sit with the government, and they what our suggestions and policy advice actually gets approved into the Council of Ministers. Some of the challenges that we've been sort of like trying to keep abreast is the fact that, you know, we talk about the VET system. The VET system is sometimes in Albania, it's sort of like seen as attracting underachievers and underperformers. So it also has a reputation of being sort of like not very much sort of like it's a secondary choice rather than like primary choice for those that want to go to university. Having said this, the struggle in the systemic way is the fact that in a dynamic labor market, I think the system has to actually respond to the needs of the market in a very agile way. And I think this is what we're trying to actually make our partners work with by employing certain tools that go along the skills needs analysis that, you know, take place on a periodic way, and also assessments and data that are becoming available. One crucial role here is the role of the private sector. We did come in the sector with the idea of trying to get the dual system. For us, for those that are not aware, the dual system is a typical German, Swiss, and Austrian system of vocational training, which is basically based on apprenticeships. But this has a prerequisite of having a well-established and strategic working private sector, which in the country that we are working on, it's not quite there yet. It works in a very short-term vision and planning. So it's kind of makes it difficult to engage the private sector for long-term curricula. At the same time, our VET system here, it's school-based, it's not company-based. So we have to go around like spending time in the companies, but you know, the primary sort of like base is the school. So this sort of like private sector engagement, I think it's crucial as when it comes to the systemic changes and approaches, because it's a three sort of like partite thing. You know, we do have the government, we do have the employers, and we do also have the you know, the UNDP as well as the students that we are supporting. One last argument as far as the system is the quality assurance. Again, as I was mentioning earlier, the system, the VET schools here are sort of like very much, let's say, rudimentary, at least has been in the past, of the former communist regime. Then, you know, without investments and sort of like decreasing relevance, they sort of became a little bit of out of the scope of the accreditation. So basically, we are trying to also make sure, just like in the university level, the vet providers in Albania are also accredited. So basically, whoever chooses to go to the schools doesn't do so just because it has a secondary option, but it chooses to do so because it has a perspective for the future. And I think this is something that we are still continuing. It's a long-term process that we will continue to work. Can we just move in to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. And I think, the idea of piloting that we mentioned, it's I think Xiaoling mentioned all the lessons that are true and relevant. Basically, it's just about to provide another alternative activation model for young people. We started with the idea of applying self-employment basically as the beginning of the SDG era. If you all remember, there was this drive, the Future We Want consultations that country office organized and with the UN. And when we traveled around Albania, we saw young people that were sort of discouraged, and they saw their future as working in public clerks in a remote areas of the country without taking advantage of what's on offer in terms of the market and the development across the border this day and age. So basically, we started promoting self-employment, that we are lucky after several rounds of applications. We are sort of last year, we made it that the self-employment is actually now part of the mainstream active labor market measures of the government, of the National Employment Services, that we are also continuing to support now at this stage with capacities and technical expertise to run and evaluate and support the winners. I think one of the lessons that perhaps I'd like to mention here is that I guess in everywhere, we are living in an age that startup initiatives are blossoming everywhere, just in Albania as well. So we do have startup weekends and all sorts of initiatives and boot camps that sorry, these boot camps that are being proliferated, and the challenge is now basically how to build all these initiatives into the ecosystem. That's why for us it was important to get the pilot approved and mainstreamed as part of the labor market policies of the Albanian National Employment Services. And the last slide, I think the idea of working with vulnerable groups in VET, we do have a lot of experience. We do have another sort of sector that we work on social inclusion, whereas the employment sort of sector that we're working on, I think we found out that some of the challenges are that these two sectors do not talk to one another. Social sector basically takes care of the social needs, and employment takes care of the employment needs, while it has to be a sort of an integrated approach to the activation of those that are part of the social insurance schemes, or social what we call in Albania here the social systems in Dima Ekonomike. So basically also try to get these two systems talk to one another in an integrated way, an integrated case management approach. And I think this day and age, it has to be mentioned, there's a lot of data around. With a lot of data around, you can do wonders. You don't need to have large scale surveys and all sorts of monthly work that you need to prepare to anticipate what the needs in the labor market are. We do have access to the tax offices or the labor or the statistics offices. So we're trying to make sure that all this data that are available, we can be able to support a system that actually can identify new vulnerabilities that can be addressed with policies, with curricula, or with interventions. And the last example I'd like to mention, which is something that we are currently promoting, is basically the establishment of a social employment fund for people with disabilities. due to our own work, this has been revised. It was a dormant law back since 1995 that was never sort of like in place. With our consultations, with our access with people with disabilities, and with the government, we ensured that we had the legislative changes. We are now working on the establishment of the system, which is based on a levy, on a quota on a levy system that basically goes to the investment for the education, the training, and employment of people with disabilities. So I think this is something of a breakthrough that we have been working on, even with our support from our regional hub. So this is basically a highlight of our experiences, and I believe I went a little bit over time, so I'm just gonna leave it here, and I welcome any questions or anything or any ideas that would like to be discussed further. Thank you.
Thank you, Enno. Very, very interesting and very useful discussion, and of course, Nuno for your introduction to that, and Xiaoling for the presentation. Those are the set presentations that we set for this morning, and we wanted to leave ample time for some questions, which you can access through adding something into the chat, or you can also provide your hand up through the hand up mechanism, and we'd be pleased to call on you. Enno, it was a very interesting discussion, and I was pleased some years back to actually be in Albania to see some of the work that you've done in support of persons with disabilities. So I've been very impressed with how that's developed over time. You know, some of your discussion and also the discussion that Xiaoling raised, I think to me raises a very important question, and that is, you know, yes, there's a lot of these different efforts going on, boot camps and so on, and the piece actually raises some important issues on, once we've done these entrepreneurship efforts, how do we build it into something that's more, you know, long-standing or sustainable? And I know the piece that Xiaoling put together talks about opportunities for establishing microcredit funds and some other mechanisms to keep these efforts longer going. But I wonder, Xiaoling and of course Enno and the team from Albania could make any mention of how they're seeing some opportunities for that type of ongoing financing and support for entrepreneurship to continue. I think would be very interesting for our listeners to hear from. I don't know, Xiaoling, whether you want to make any comment based upon what you saw from the paper, and of course we are pleased to have Enno make any comment as well.
Thank you, Alan. That's a great question. So I think there are a couple of things that UNDP are doing or are trying to do. The first is something I talk about, like bridging the distance between financial institution and youth. And sometimes that means that to group individual financial institutions together to create cooperative financing groups to provide those kind of microfinancing mechanisms to use. And also, I mean, one thing is for access, another thing is the design, right? So it also to make sure that, you know, those microcredit programs that would work for young entrepreneurs for their own startups. So I'll leave it there, and I'm sure colleagues in the countries have more experience and understanding on that.
Enno, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that basically, I think there are two schools of thought here. You know, you either, you know, build the ecosystem around the government, or you build the ecosystem around the private sector. I think, you know, it's difficult, sort of like, I think it depends on the context. Until now, the way that it's been going here is basically to build the ecosystem around the legislative changes. There's a ministry here that was established in support of entrepreneurship. That has been working on a startup law. Like, you know, everyone talks about startups, but, you know, it's about the status. You know, you get a status that is recognized. You know, you get a time that, like 3 years, 5 years, you can experiment, you can pilot, you can, you know, you get some tax relief. And I don't think we're there yet. And I think we're intending to go down that route. There is also the other school of thought that says, okay, you know, the less government, you know, presence, obviously, the better. So I guess it's more of the circumstantial sort of depends on the countries. For us, from the youth employment point of view, and I think this goes around, that makes true for, I don't know if you have Western Balkans colleagues here, but I think the self-employment in the as part of the active labor market measures has been applied everywhere in the national employment services around the Western Balkans. So I think it's a recognized tool that which I mean, if I may get a chance to address one of the comments that I see in the chat box, it's not an easy thing to do. The national employment services, at least in our country, are attracting those that are discouraged. They are long term. They don't have a sort of like a good level of education. So the pool that they are working on, it's very difficult to stimulate the self-employment. So you have to go down from basics. So you have to start from the ABC. So I think it's not an easy job. We're not talking about like, innovative startups that, look into the IT, the IT scene or anything. We're looking at like, skills, building skills that sometimes can be like, leading to good, lifestyle and making sure that you earn your living. So it's a different level of approach that we're talking about. So it is difficult, as it was mentioned from someone here in the chat box.
Excellent. No, I appreciate it. Ana Garcia, you have a very interesting question, but maybe I can get you to unmic and actually ask it directly from the chat. Ana, would you be willing?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Thank you so much, Xiaoling, for the excellent presentation. I was wondering, you mentioned that there are plenty of data about unemployment that we can tap on. What is more difficult is understanding sometimes why people are unemployed, because there might be multiple factors at play. And I was wondering if there is any lessons learned that you found, or what is your experience in trying to understand what are the different factors at play. Gender is clearly one of them, but there might be multiple ones. So if you can talk a little bit about that. Thank you so much.
I think you're touching, I just see your comment now, I think you're touching a very sort of like important aspect, the social norms. I mean, in our country, we do have the norms that sometimes are, you need to address, and obviously the data won't tell you the full picture. So you need to go in depth. Gender obviously sort of like prevails in these sort of like sense. That's why we think that the work with the social linking, the integrated approach with social services and employment would be a good sort of like bridge of trying to address some of these issues. We have tried, I should say, not to sort of like great extent of success so far because of the difficult matter of the care economy aspects, where actually, you need to use like package of support for women or like single mothers, or, making sure the private sector offers certain like kindergarten sort of like facilities. However, I mean, I must say we haven't gone into a great length into this thing. And I think, for us, a success that we are getting the People Disability Fund, Employment Fund up and running, and we are still not there because it's so difficult. One last thing about systems. I know it sounds fancy, but it's a bit boring when it comes to daily work, because you need to work on legal frameworks, and it's not quite visible in terms of we are doing this and that, and we can showcase it, and our showcase is like government approved a certain regulation. This is how we actually build our communication sort of like around these topics. So it's a kind of work that requires like dedication and sitting together, spending hours and making sure, as we all appreciate, the bureaucracies like our own, they take time, and government machines also take time. So basically it's a matter of work and getting to work together with partners.
Excellent. If I could ask Blair Aliko, you put an interesting question into the chat in terms of how to lead with informality and some of the issues that you're facing in Algeria. Would you be willing to take the mic and make your question and discussion? Thank you.
Hi, greetings. Well, colleagues, as you know, I'm very biased because it's my own country that just was presented. So although I work in Algeria, so basically, this is a fundamental priority for Algeria context, and youth employment is basically the most important pressing priorities identified in the country, given the transition we have been going through for the past 2 years with the issues of the oil prices decreasing, and then basically moving away from a subsidized and to basically promote private entrepreneurship development and self-employment startups. I fully subscribe to the context, although we are in a much bigger scale where a lot of initiatives are taking place either directly by the government or by the development organizations and partners, but tackling everything in isolation. So social protection, social security is taken in isolation by social development ministries, which are dealing with vulnerable groups. Then, of course, micro enterprise development and startups dealt with by different funds and different ways without this intersection. However, we are in a context, and I know that this is similar to Albania, where there is a lot of informal sector. So in Nigeria context, we have 40% in the informal sector that are employed without any social protection. And basically, because it's a very social kind of driven country, everything is subsidized here. So you have the food basket subsidized, you have the health sectors, you have access to social services. So it's a very typical situation where we need to see what are the forms of promoting self-employment, generating growth, and then dealing with this informality and thinking on a bigger picture about the sustainability of the approach with regards to the self-employment. So this is why I brought this up, because this informality, especially in a country which might not be the case of Albania, but in case of Algeria, where in 10 years we will have 10 million more, we need to look at this demographic dividend in connection to the employment, generation of wealth, and to social protection schemes. So this is why this approach is fundamentally important to us, accessing the tools upstream, downstream, and somebody put it here. And then the intersectorality, what would be some of the accelerators that we can learn from and use in a smaller scale here that can address this issue. Over.
Excellent, thank you, Bleta. There were a couple of questions in the chat regarding the observatory, that I think you made mention of. I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, yes, very, very briefly. I think, we have been trying to work around a labor market information system for about 6 years now. We've been going around it from different angles. And in the end, we just basically gave up of the idea because the system is a bit of a scary thing. When you introduce it, like when you talk to people, oh, it's a system, then who's going to run it? Who's going to maintain it? Is it statistics? Is it tax office? Is it prime minister? Is it finance? So basically, we actually dropped the word system and we introduced the word observatory. And actually, we tried and tested. I think this is one of the sort of like the positives, if we can say so, about COVID. Because of the access to data we had, we started producing like frequent policy briefs, data briefs, measuring the employment, the numbers that were like being laid off, the people that were actually like being, the companies that were applying for the subsidy schemes, and it actually measuring the unemployment, the levels, measuring job search data in Google Ads. So basically trying to get a bit of a sense of what's going on and also get the trends. And I think this was very much well perceived. And that actually, after about a year of the pandemic, basically we came up with the conclusion that, we just don't need to call it a system. We just, this day and age, we can host an iCloud platform that basically, gets the data together and we can produce snapshots and we can play around with data and say, okay, this is coming up. Will be an issue in the next 6 months. Does this kind of like, let's say, approach that can be adopted in terms of like sectors, specific skills, if we also link it with the national qualifications framework and the list of professions. So basically you can actually, if a good, well-established running system will know that, we know now that we have a shortage of doctors and nurses, but maybe in the next 5 years, we'll have a shortage of, I don't know, IT people that we already have now or something else. So basically it's to give the policymakers a bit of a tool that say, okay, this is like an alarm bell that we need to do something about. We are in the process. Basically, we are now in the process of soliciting, support for the establishment of the observatory. So I'll be glad to go back and explain a little bit more about the future. If I can also take another minute for the informality issue, as well as the question about I think was in the chat about the COVID and I think the recovery context. I think in Albania, we also had an earthquake back in November 2019. So after the earthquake, we basically went into the COVID. So we had a double shock, economic shock. Informality, I think the way that we've been trying to tackle informality is for the self-employment scheme that we supported. A condition was that whoever was going to be selected as a winning sort of like a business idea for the support, to be eligible for the support, they had to register in the business center. So they had to come up with a you know, the number, the business number. And the same approach has been also taken for our recovery, earthquake recovery work on also that is being expanded now on this methodology on in motion, which is basically getting back businesses, you know, building back better for small micro family enterprises. Again, for those that we selected for support, they had to be registered. They had to be registered in the business center. So basically, it's a way of trying to incentivize registration. Obviously, it's not very sort of like sustained, that it needs to be basically coming from the government. So informality, it's an issue in Albania too. It's not 40%, but it's around 30%. So, you know, it's not very much different from what you have in Algeria.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you can see, I think from all of us as we've been looking through the chat, that the questions and issues are expanding, and they're going to go far beyond what we can address in today's meeting, not only because the subject is so important, but also because the presentation that Xiaoling gave and the explanations of what's going on in Albania that Enos talked about has really sparked us to bring a lot of questions to bear. Let me try to call on one additional question that I thought brought an interesting connection to the not only between skills development, but also youth empowerment overall. Noella, Richard, I don't know if you would be willing to speak your question in terms of this connection between skills development and youth empowerment, but I think that would be a fitting kind of final question and discussion before we wrap up today.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thanks for organizing. Really interesting, and I'm almost thinking that we would need a follow-up to this webinar to dig deeper. Thank you very much. One of the key questions that we see also arising in some of the discussions is whether, you know, youth skills development and youth economic empowerment is enough to contribute to youth empowerment and to address youth aspirations in today's turbulent times and uncertain times for young people, but also a time when we see a closing civic space, etc. So any thoughts about how to measure, in a way, the impact that youth economic empowerment has on youth empowerment overall, but also do we see that a conducive environment from the political side or from the governance side is actually favorable to meaningful youth economic empowerment? Thank you.
That's certainly a difficult question. I don't know, Xiaoling or Enno, whether you want to take a crack at a response. Certainly very important issues that Noelle is raising.
Maybe Xiaoling first, and I can go from our own perspective.
Sure, thank you very much. Noella, that is a great question, and it's a very big question as well. So this reflection paper, we primarily looked at youth economic empowerment, not the political empowerment side for that part. But I think there are something that are, you know, that connects one and another, because when we look at the evaluations, very often when youth skills has been improved, when they have economic and livelihood opportunities, it's not just their living condition has been improved, but it's also improved their level of confidence and their sense of worthiness in the society. That is also seen in the evaluations. I think that well connects to some other issues related to civil participation and even violence against extremism. So I know that this reflection paper didn't talk about that, but I do recall that in our thematic evaluation of conflict-affected countries, we have a subchapter on youth empowerment that also covers those subtopics. If you're interested, I encourage you to have a look at that. Thank you.
I mean, if I can basically give like our perspective here, I think it's what Noella raised. It's I think it requires so much attention, because all of a sudden, you know, although you think you're doing well, or you know, figures are telling you one story, I think, you know, there is a potential of like, you know, the youth being in the streets protesting. And we're telling this from experience. You know, we had like a student protest two or 3 years ago. All of a sudden, out of the blue, students were complaining about the quality in the education, in the university education system. And in some of the countries, you know, we do have, including our own, maybe we do have a little bit of apathy around youth. We do have a little bit of like disenfranchisement, and obviously youth employment programming are not a recipe for tackling these issues. However, I think they're a good starting point, because you know, especially if you make those programming at the national level, or at least systemic at the local level. I'll just give you one example. We went into a small municipality up in the North Albania. We're trying to organize some of these design thinking boot camps and try to get like ideas from youth about, you know, getting like a little bit of a community, or promoting their artisan sort of like culture. And what we found out is that, you know, people are discouraged. I mean, in the remote areas, people are discouraged. They're sort of like, okay, they see their future as sort of like being linked to any political party, or being linked to any network they are part of, and they don't see it as being, you know, in their own hands. And I think that's a crucial part of it. And I'm not sure whether it can be addressed with one or two projects. I think it requires a bit of a change in the entire approach, going from the education level and starting from you know, the early age. That's my thinking anyway. However, in Albania, what we try to do is basically, you know, there's an agency here, is that the government established the agency of youth, where, you know, this, maybe I get this chance to say that we also, in cooperation with other UN agencies, have been working on a national action plan for youth, where certain agencies like UNFPA works on certain aspects. UNICEF covers the education. We covered the employment and skills. So there's a bit of a concerted effort. And if I may address one of the questions here, how do we make sure this like coordination in the where are so many actions and actors? I think one of the mechanism that has been promoted here from the European, and I mentioned we are a European Union accession country. One of the mechanisms that has been promoted here is what is called the integrated policy management groups, where under the leadership of the ministry in charge, in this case, the finance and economy, all ministries or all donors get together and discuss priorities and issues on a certain sector. And I think in the employment sector has been one of the sort of like at least recognized as best practices in working in the country, because of so many donor interests, because of the, you know, the key issues that are, you know, facing the country, but also the fact that you know, we've also made our sort of availability with the studies and the policy analysis and the work that we've been feeding sort of like the discussions in these forums, which I think, you know, it was worth sharing. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the responses on a wide variety of interesting questions that have come up. And Xiaoling, of course, your work in terms of raising up these key issues that we could all discuss has been very much appreciated. Colleagues, we're coming to the end of this webinar, but if you would allow me just a couple of additional minutes, I wanted to pass the microphone, if you will, to Tina Torchman-Nebe, who is our colleague and on the IEO and the coordinator of the Reflection Series. We want to give just a little note about how we're trying to use the Spark Blue as a way to continue this discussion and to be able to respond to the wide variety of chat issues that have come up whenever we have these issues. Tina, can I pass to you, please?
Yes, thanks, Alan, and thank you everyone for this extremely rich discussion. It was a really great start to our 2021 Reflections webinar series. So there is in the chat, you will find a message from my colleague Sonjui, who put the URL of our Spark Blue space there. So what we would love you to do is to click on that and sign up for Spark Blue, and then sign up for the reflection space. And you will see posted there our first question to you, which is basically asking you if you've come across similar lessons and if you have anything to share at this point. And why we're doing this is that the IO is conducting also a thematic evaluation on this topic, which will go to the UNDP Executive Board early next year. And we want to make sure we capture the richness of what's going on and also get some input on perhaps some emerging lessons or new things you're trying out in your countries that haven't been fully documented yet and that we're perhaps otherwise not able to capture in our evaluation. So for us, this is an important source of information to make sure we come up with actionable recommendations for the organization at the end of the evaluation process. So see you on Spark Blue, and many thanks also to BPPS for collaborating with us on moderating and getting the Spark Blue space all set up. Thanks.
So thank you, Tina, and again, on behalf of the Independent Evaluation Office and UNDP, we really appreciate everyone's participation in today's discussion. As indicated, we're going to be doing this on a regular basis with a variety of important issues on the development work of UNDP, and we look forward to your continuing contributions on it. Thank you again to Nuno and Enno for the opportunity to really get in detail on the work in Albania as well, and Xiaoling, of course, for your presentation and Oscar's introduction. So at this point, I wish all of you a good rest of the day, and we look forward to taking up these issues with you again in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.